everyone and welcome to this video. Now today I'm going to be taking a look at an album here by Elvis Costello. Not done a Costello review in a little while, so I'm going to be looking at his album Spike today. Just doing my usual thing, giving a bit of background information about the album, then showing you my vinyl copy of it here, and then looking at each of the album songs in detail. So this was Costello's 12th studio album, released on the 6th of February in 1989. So this album very much, I think, marked a kind of change for Costello, like a new chapter in his career. It was his first album on the Warner Brothers label, who were obviously very excited about their new signing, according to Costello, he was given the budget of a small movie to make this album. It had also been a little while since his last album, Blood and Chocolate, came out towards the tail end of 1986, so it'd been well over 2 years since he's released any music. I'm pretty sure the longest gap in his career up to that point. And in this time he'd amassed a lot of ideas. Basically, he said that he had around this time blueprints for 5 different albums floating around. But in the end decided to make all of them, to combine them all onto one album. But holding the record together is T-Bone Burnett, who Costello had worked with on the King of America album. So he returns as producer. But for this album, the sessions were a lot more sporadic and spread out, and recorded in 4 different studios in Hollywood, New Orleans, Dublin and London, each with different groups of musicians, including names as diverse as Paul McCartney, Alan Toussaint, Mitchell Froom, Ben Montench and Jim Keltner. Also, I suppose, adding to the the sense that Costello lacked a kind of singular vision for this album was the mix of writing credits on this album. On some tracks he goes by the name Elvis Costello, on others he credits his songs to his birth name, Declan McManus. But this album was a surprising commercial success, perhaps led on by its successful lead single Veronica. This album reached number 5 in the UK and number 32 in America. For him, a big commercial hit, certainly his highest charting US album since Imperial Bedroom, and his highest UK chart success since Punch the Clock from 1983. So I will just now show you my vinyl copy of it here. This is just a bog standard original UK pressing of it here. Firstly the cover. I don't like the cover. I think it's a awfully ghastly cover. Not a fan of it. I guess I can kind of see what he was going for. It is supposed to stand out or be a bit garish, but no, I'm not a fan. The back has just got the credits, so who plays on each of the tracks, which is really useful for this album, just considering there's such an array of different musicians and session musicians on the album. Inner sleeve looks so you got a bit of writing there, and then all of the lyrics. And as I said, this is on a Warner Brothers label, so that is what the record looks like. Okay, so I'll now go over each of the album songs in detail. I'll score each track out of 10, and then use those scores to give us a overall percentage marking for the album. First track up is one of the more commercial songs on the album, I would say. It's called This Town. And it starts off very 80s sounding, this one here. You've got very, very Punch the Clock kind of style with this kind of very big, 80s drum sound on it. On this track, you've got a bit of a kind of rock supergroup performing, so you've got Paul McCartney on bass, even though this wasn't one of the songs that he had wrote with McCartney. We'll get to those in a bit. And you've also got Roger McGuinn from the Byrds playing his kind of signature 12-string guitar. And it's a good song, this. I mean, it's certainly not one of my favourite tracks ever. I wouldn't say it's a highlight, of Costello's career, by any means. But it's a decent track, and I think that there's some, good lyrics on it. He sings, you're nobody till everyone in this town thinks you're a bastard. I like the song, and I think it's a good upbeat opener to the album. So This Town for me would get an 8 out of 10. And And then we kind of follow that with a rather heavy-hitting song called Let Him Dangle. Now this song is very much about the kind of like debate around like the death penalty and capital punishment, and specifically like on this track mentions the case of Derek Bentley, who would receive like a posthumous pardon like for like his like wrongful conviction and then subsequent like hanging. And he sort of like, there's some great lines in this, like he thinks like, well, it's hard to imagine it's the times that have changed when there's a murder in the kitchen that is brutal and strange. If killing anyone is a terrible crime, why does this bloodthirsty chorus come round from time to time? Let him dangle. And yeah, so I think lyrically it's really powerful, and I think like really works and kind of highlighting like that case. It's not a case I was familiar with, so it's certainly a good track to get kind of a bit of like an education from, like certainly, and like kind of like I can like learn something, which is great. But musically for me is a little bland, I would say. It reminds me a little bit of Pills and Soap, one of his earlier tracks, just in terms of like its like atmosphere and that, but it's just not quite as interesting. The kind of like arrangement's very generic, but I think it does score very highly though for its lyrics. So yeah, Let Him Dangle for me would get an 8 out of 10 overall. But then we go down a notch a little bit for me with the next track, Deep Dark Truthful Mirror, which is a kind of New Orleans style ballad. It's quite minimalistic, like arrangement wise. You really just got like a brass section kind of doing most of like the heavy lifting like on this one here, but it's just not one of my favourites on the album. I think it drags a little bit pretentious lyrically. It's not a song which I necessarily connect with. I think it kind of it just doesn't do much for me, this song personally. I mean his vocals decent, but I mean that's really like all like the only like noteworthy parts like off like this song for me. So yeah, Deep Dark Truthful Mirror would get a 6 out of 10 overall. Okay, but then we get the lead-off single for the album, which I've got the 12-inch for it here. So this is Veronica, which is a co-write with with McCartney, and this was one of the first songs that they wrote together. They wrote quite a few songs, probably about a dozen, like in like this kind of period. But this one was apparently one which Costello kind of brought to McCartney and said, like, can we kind of work on this together a little bit? So I think it was almost there, but just maybe touched up a little bit, like with like McCartney. So it's got a very Beatlesy feel, very upbeat, and a kind of melodic flair, which is missing from a lot of the other tracks, like on like the album. And you've got a great lyric on it as well, essentially like about like an old lady who's like slowly losing like her like memory, and very much inspired by Costello's grandma, like who had died like fairly recently. He sings with it like, well, she used to have a carefree mind of her own and a delicate look in her eyes. These days, I'm afraid she's not even sure if her name is Veronica. So, I mean, and like this kind of lyric paired with the very upbeat, very kind of whimsical, sort of jangly kind of like arrangement, I think like that's a version that works really, really, really well. And yeah, it kind of like was the kind of commercial hit which Costello hadn't had for certainly many years. Like I'm thinking probably like his biggest hit since Every Day like I Write the Book, like I would say. And yeah, it's a great track. So I'll just quickly show this single. It's it's on Warner Brothers. It's got a couple of B-sides on here, songs, You're No Good, which is a cover by the look of it, The Room Nobody Lives In, and Coal Train Robberies. Again, I think all of those are covers. And then you've got a poster in here as well, which I'll just quickly show. Remember this being quite a nice poster, actually. Let's have a look at it here. Yeah, well, that's a very nice poster, actually. See, yeah, I think that would have made a lot better album cover, personally, yeah. So yeah, very nice single here. And yeah, for me, easily the best track on the album. Now I'm dead, now I'm dead, now I'm dead, and I'm young. Okay, next track up is called God's Comic, and this is a decent track for me. It's got a memorable, if slightly annoying chorus. Again, you've got a lot of kind of multi-layered vocals going on. It just gets a little bit much like on like the chorus. And lyrically, it's a little bit hard to put your finger on this song. I've read that it's about a kind of character who's kind of like a fool, like he sort of dies, goes to heaven, and kind of shows God like the demise like of like humanity. Like he even throws in a dig like Andrew Andrew Lloyd Webber like on this one, like as well. But I do like some of like the lyrics. Like is a good line about like sort of like, I've been wading through all this unbelievable junk and wondering if I should have given the world to the monkeys. That's a great line. But for me, it's not a favourite. It drags a little bit. It's got a fairly nice easygoing, like rolling kind of feel to it, but it just means like it's a little bit boring musically. But yeah, a creative lyric, and for that I think I would give it a 7 out of 10. Okay, next up is called Chewing Gum, and this is certainly for me like one of like the weaker tracks like on the album. It's got a kind of funk feel to it. You've got a lot of punchy brass like on this one here, and lyrically I've read it's about the dysfunctional relationship between a obnoxious businessman and a like what's described like in the song like as like a mail order bride, but for me it's just a dull track. It doesn't do anything for me musically, and for me the lyrics kind of just sort of like fail like to like resonate. I mean, it's got a fun kind of like sort of like horn section. There's a bit like where it kind of like you get to like the end of the chorus, and then you've got a weird kind of tuba solo which sounds quite like off, like, but I like don't mind it. But yeah, just as like a whole song, it's nothing special for me, so Chewing Gum will get a 5 out of 10. Okay, then closing off side one, we get probably one of Costello's most, I was going to say most notorious songs, but certainly one of his most noteworthy and probably his most political. We get Tramp the Dirt Down. Now, essentially, this is Costello's song about Margaret Thatcher and kind of wanting to sort of stomp on the grave, like off like the then Prime Minister. And it's got a very biting chorus. He sings like, well, I hope I don't die too soon. I pray the Lord my soul to save. Oh, I'll be a good boy, I'm trying so hard to behave, because there's one thing I know I'd like to live long enough to savour. That's when they finally put you in the ground. I'll stand on your grave and tramp the dirt down. So very spiteful like lyric like there, like, but I think quite fitting, I suppose. But musically, it's a folky protest song. Basically, you've got lots of kind of traditional Irish instruments, a lot of pipes, lots of fiddles going on here. Very kind of, so I can't help think he was possibly inspired by like the Pogues on this track, a band he had produced like fairly recently. But yeah, for me, again, not a track I would ever go to necessarily, but when it's on the album, I do always listen to it like all the way through, because yeah, it is certainly a powerful like quite profound song. So yeah, Tramp the Dirt Down would get an 8 out of 10 from me. Okay, next up is Stalin Malone. Now, this is easily the weakest track on the album. There was no need to put this song like on the album. It's another brass-heavy song, but this time it is pointless instrumental filler here. Drags on for almost 4 minutes, and there's just no need for it. Doesn't go anywhere, this one here. It's a bit odd, because on like the back of it, like there's some lyrics, or it says Stalin Malone, and then there's some lyrics. So I'm not sure whether this was supposed to be a kind of proper song, or like what, like, but yeah, it's just an instrumental track which just goes on and on and on, and there's no need for it. Really, for me, ruins the flow like off the album, because I think we were getting into like a half decent rhythm like with the album, but this one just sort of brings it right down. So yeah, 3 out of 10 there for Stalin Malone. Okay, next track up is called Satellite. Now, this is a really nice ballad, like on the album. You've got a really nice musical arrangement, some nice charming bells and chimes going on, but a really good song, I think. A strong chorus where you've got a lovely harmony vocal courtesy of Chrissie Hynde. And in a strange way on this track, Elvis Costello, he's almost foreshadowing the internet, like in like a lot of ways, and especially the kind of darker sides, like off it, like where like he says, like all over the world at the very same time, people sharing the same cheap sensation, the thrill of watching someone watching those forbidden things we never mentioned. So, like yeah, a slightly dark song, but again quite profound, and I think really good like when like it's on. So. Yeah, Satellites would get a 8 out of 10. Bats, paws, and claws. Next track up is Pads, Paws and Claws. Now, this is the second co-write on the album with McCartney, and I would say this is probably the weakest of all the songs that they wrote together, or credited to have writing together. It's a very messy song, this, and I think it's half the song itself is quite underwhelming, but then you've got a very odd production on this. You've got some kind of, it's a strange mix of kind of rockabilly, but you've also got all these these electronic sounds going on, these kind of sort of synth stabs and stuff, and it's just a bit of a mess, really. So yeah, I would give that one a 5 out of 10, and even that's maybe being a bit too generous.
Baby plays around.
Next track up is called A Baby Plays Around. Now, I have also got this one on a single. This was the second single for the album. I think the third single was This Town, which I don't have a copy of. But this is a very odd choice to choose as a single for me. It's nowhere near as successful as Veronica, and I can perfectly see why. I mean, it's a pleasant song, stripped back. The only two musicians credited on here are Elvis Costello himself and Mitchell Froome, who plays some organ. But aside from that, it's just, it's a pleasant acoustic track, but it just doesn't have a catchy hook to it, and it's an odd song, to choose, as a single. Lyrically, it's kind of about a guy who's sort of girlfriend or partner has kind of just left. He sings on it it's not open to discussion anymore. She walks those shiny streets, I walk the worn out floor. She was all I had worth living for. And it's, again, it's pleasant enough, on the album. I think it's good that it's more stripped back. We kind of need that, at this point, on the album. But, for me, we get a 7 out of 10. Next track up is one of the more big production numbers, on the album. It's Miss Macbeth. And this one, very kind of vivid song. This starts almost like the kind of soundtrack's a horror film. It's kind of lyrically about this kind of witch-like character, who scares all of the neighbourhood children. But I do really like the chorus. Again, it's a shame I can't remember what it goes like. So I mean, it's maybe not that good. When you get to it, and every day she lives out another love song. It's a tearful lament of somebody done wrong. That bit, again, the music gets a bit more upbeat, it kind of changes gear, and it becomes a bit more almost carnival kind of feel to it, but I think it really works and really fits the track, and I think, lifts up what would have otherwise been probably a 6 out of 10 track, for me, anyway, to a 7.
You're a fine one, just like me.
Okay, penultimate song now is called Any King's Shilling, and this is another one of the more traditional sounding songs on the album, traditional kind of folk arrangements on here. You've got a harp on it, which I suppose is a little bit different, but then you've got the kind of traditional Irish fiddles, and lyrically, again, a strong track. This one about army conscription, with Costello kind of pleading with a person not to accept the King's Shillings. I think those were I did a bit of reading, things you would accept the King's Shillings, if you were to then be, conscripted, into, the army, and he sort of sings it please don't put your silly head in that British soldier's hat, you've done your duty, that's enough of that, and I think it kind of is touching on his kind of Irish roots, a little bit, on this one here, but I really like the track. Again, not what I would necessarily go to, but it works on the album, and I think is, another fine addition, so that one would get a 7 out of 10. Okay, and now we're on to the closer, which is called Last Boat Leaving. Now, this for me is a slightly forgettable song. Again, you've got the kind of folky arrangement on this one here. You've got these kind of the steel brushes on the drums again, and some good acoustic guitar. I think this one lyrically is about people having to emigrate, to find work and that, and the impact that can have on their families. He sings to it hush my little one, don't cry so. You know your daddy's bound to go. They took his pride, they took his voice. I think it's a nice song. Again, it's a calming closer. It's not the kind of big bombastic closer by any means, but it's a decent track to close off the album there. So for me, that one would also get a 7 out of 10.
'Cause no matter how long we sail, we'll never reach the shore.
Okay, so overall this album would score 64%, so that admittedly isn't a high score. And I do think this is a patchy album by any means. I mean, there are some great tracks. I think Veronica is the true highlight, but then for me, the rest of the tracks sort of verge between pretty good, not great, but pretty good, and in some cases downright awful. So there is a strange kind of mixture on this album. I do think he put that it does suffer from what he said about trying to make 5 albums at once. There's a lot of stuff on this album, a lot of different musicians and that. And definitely did kind of start off this kind of period in Costello's career where he would move away from having a fixed band and like I said work with a variety of artists and collaborators. But I think from this point going forward, he would kind of focus his efforts, so he would do an album with Alan Toussaint, or he'd do an album with Burt Bacharach, as a full project, rather than on here where it is these collaborations are just kind of one-offs on a whole album, and I think it kind of becomes a bit unfocused a little bit. I definitely think it could have done with some trimming. It's a long album, it's well over an hour in length, so I think definitely a bit of editing here and there would have bumped up the score. And in terms of his discography, I would say probably a mid-tier album for him. He has made albums which I do think are a little bit worse than this, but I think he's made so many more which I think are even better. Comparing it to his other recent ones, again, I need to revisit King of America, and Blood and Chocolate. Those aren't albums I know particularly well, but again, they probably sit similar level to this album. But I do know for a fact that I actually prefer the follow-up, Mighty Like a Rose, which is not the most popular opinion. That album, when I reviewed it a few years back, scored 71%, so it kind of just sort of shows you there that I do actually rate that a little bit higher. But no, Spike, an interesting record, certainly not one I would say if you're not a fan of Costello go to. I would say stick with the earlier work, if I'm being honest. But if you're a big fan and you've not listened to this yet, definitely give it a try, because there are some gems lurking on it. So yes, I hope you have enjoyed my review of Elvis Costello's album Spike here. If you've got any suggestions for future reviews, please do leave them down below in the comments, and I will see you all next time for the next video. Goodbye.